Hello everybody. So I'm going to start off slow for people to start joining in. But essentially I'm going to go ahead and go over a recap of our last couple of classes and then what we're going to be doing moving forward. So the original plan of action for me teaching this Java kind of stuff, it was more to go at a little bit of a faster pace. But upon, kind of going back through the videos, just kind of reviewing over the different materials that I've posted and all that kind of stuff, one of the things that I would like to do is try and slow it down a bit, as I understand that many of these basics are going to be probably like the hardest things to get at first. And then we can really get it rolling. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you guys really get it the first time around. So in case you don't remember, last class we went ahead and reviewed over variables. Variables as well as operations, right? They kind of come hand in hand. And this is really stuff that you'll be familiar with even if you're just dealing with things like math. And the reason for this is obviously because we as humans don't really like different values that we don't know, that we can't find, right? And essentially by going ahead and labeling these values that we don't know as variables, it's just a common way for everyone to kind of communicate, like, oh, I don't know this value, this is how I'm going to go ahead and find it, right? So in the case of programming, it's a little bit different than that in math, in that a variable in programming, you do know the value. I mean, unless it's like an input or something like that. But for now, you do know the value and you will be assigning the value. And the variable is simply used as a common way to express this value without explicitly copying and pasting the value everywhere, right? Say you have a sentence you want to print out multiple times. You don't want to go ahead and copy and paste that sentence, right? What happens if it's like 600 words long? No one wants to do that. So instead you just store that in a string and you print out the string every time you want to print out that value. So hopefully the concept of a value kind of paints out as not too complicated to understand. Oops, went to the wrong page. So for now we are going to we're going to go ahead and start up our NetBeans IDE, and the goal of today's lesson is to get you guys exposed to all of the kind of things that we're going to touch upon in the coming weeks. And it's not really something that's super complicated or anything like that. I should be able to explain it in a way that's pretty explanatory for you guys to get. So why don't we go ahead and open up our files. All right. So essentially, hopefully you guys have already set up your kind of stuff over here. So go ahead and open up any one of your files. So we can actually just go into our test file here. So what we're going to be doing is, first of all, I'm going to introduce you guys to something known as loops. And loops is jumping ahead a little bit. So it's not something that you're going to get extremely fast, but there's also the concept of Boolean. And loops and Boolean is going to make up 90% of the logic that you're going to work with. Actually, I doubt you'll work with anything else in that. And then I'm going to go ahead and talk about applications. So first of all, I want to cement our understanding of variables. So as you probably have guessed, obviously this is a programming language. So there's multiple layers of understanding exactly what a variable is. For now, we're going to stay on the easiest level just to make sure you guys kind of understand exactly what a variable is and what you're going to be doing with a variable, right? A variable is, again, just any letter, say A, right? And you have to go ahead and you have to define the type. We'll put the typing later. But say I want to make it a string. and I'm just going to call it string like this, right? So Java is important where you do have to go ahead and actually say out your typing like this. Oops, and make sure you have your semicolon. And as I've said before, Java is a very strict language. It's not going to let you run away with without a semicolon, without listing your typing, that kind of stuff. It doesn't have dynamic typing. So there's a lot of different types of variables. You're going to have string A, you're going to have int b is equal to like 3. There's many different types of number typings that you can have in Java. For example, double, it's another type of number that you can have in Java. It's something that you will probably use the most, probably behind integer, I would guess, but it's nothing really more than that, nothing fancy there. Now, there is a very special category of variables that I would like to discern. And I guess it's really two categories, but it's just making a split between the two so you guys kind of understand that these two shouldn't be lumped together. They're not the same, right? And when I go ahead, so it's behind the scenes is really where you're going to understand why this is the case. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you at the highest level. Essentially, you're going to have more complicated and less complicated types of variables. And in this case, the strings and later things that you will call objects are going to be your more complicated variables, and everything else, actually I'll clarify that in a second. Everything else is going to be your less complicated. You don't need to know all these fancy words at the moment. I will teach you them later on, but I'm just trying to get you exposed to this concept. First of all, you have to understand that you cannot go in between types in Java. This is something that is, I guess, unique to Java in comparison to languages like Python, but switching between types is simply not allowed. It will give you an error. If you try to add them, if you try to print them together, if you do anything with different variables in the same line, you will get an error pretty much. So just try and make sure you are very conscious of it. Second of all, when you go ahead and you call your variables, you do not have to state the type again. You've already defined the type, and this is called initializing your variable, right? And you can initialize it simply by doing this, right? I can just go ahead and type int b, and then I can say b is equal to 3. This works as well, right? As you can see, there's no error here. It works perfectly fine. However, this is inefficient, obviously. We just added a new line for no reason. So we're going to add that. We're going to delete all that stuff. We're going to make this back to the same thing, right? So it's very important to understand the different ways you're going to interact with a variable. And this is the creation of the variable. Manipulation is just going to be using purely the variable name. That's right here. So in the case of this variable, it's going to be b. Anything that you do, you're just going to be calling b. No ints, no other special calls. This is different than right here. And the reason is because there's nothing special you can do to an integer, right? Fanciest thing you can do is like b times 4, right? Then you get 12. Well, it's a little bit different with a string. Because with a string, you will be able to do things called calling functions. Functions, methods, at this level, it doesn't matter what you call them. Because essentially, what a function or method does is it performs an action to a variable. And this action is very vague when I go ahead and say this. But you can, shorten a string. You can add to a string. You can modify it, you can delete it, you can change the contents of it. You can select only vowels, you can make it all uppercase, all lowercase. Anything that you can do to manipulate a string is what you can do to this string object. And this is why it's known as the more complicated typing of variables, because you can call in a function off of this variable, essentially, right? At the moment, I can't really recall the exact methods, but some of them are going to be like split, dot upper, dot lower. You can go ahead and research that yourselves. I'm sure if you were to just Google it, saying like string methods in Java, we can go here so you guys can see that. And you just go into the Oracle docs. Remember, Oracle for Java is going to be the most reliable because Oracle basically created Java, so it's going to have all the most professional stuff. There's nothing wrong on Oracle pretty much. So you'll see all this fancy stuff here. Don't really care about that. What you do want to look at is going to be the method summary, right? You can ignore all the constructor, all the field summary, because this is higher level stuff that you'll try and understand later. But methods, right? So this is split up into two columns, right? Two columns. And the first column is going to be called modifier and type, and the second is method and description. If you were to just guess, right, you could pretty much get what the meanings of these are, but obviously, since I know them, I can tell you. Method and description is going to be describing what the method call is and what the method does. What I mean by call is when you go ahead and you call this method, you got to type something, right? This is what you're typing. It's important to understand that inside these parentheses is something called a parameter. Parameter in its English term, or in its English meaning rather, is just anything that kind of, I guess, pertains to, it's like a basis of evaluation for a certain action, right? It's very, very vague in its actual definition. A parameter in a method is something that you enter in. And based upon this parameter, essentially the method will go ahead and do its stuff. In this case, your car at, we'll just take this very first one, it needs a parameter called int index. And an index, again, another technical term, is going to be the location inside a string. And you're like, wait, what? A location inside a word? Yeah. If I were to type out, you know, like hello, right? It's HELLO, and H is your first letter, E is your second letter. However, this is programming, and we don't start at 1. We start at 0. So H is your zeroest, E is your first, and so on. In case you need help visualizing that, H is your zeroest index, E is going to be your first index, L is going to be your second index, and the next L is going to be your third index, and this O is going to be your fourth index. So even though hello is a word with the length of 5, you are still going to only go up to 4 in your index because you start at 0. It's very important you start at 0, because a lot of beginner programming mistakes start with the fact that you forget that there is a zeroest index, and you go ahead and you start at 1. Remember, if you want to access the start of a string, the start of a number, the start of a list, the start of anything, it is 0, not 1. In almost every programming language, I think. There's only a very few special cases. So just remember, 0 is your first index. And I know that doesn't entirely make sense, but it does have a reasoning behind it, relating to the memory and the storage and all that kind of stuff. Now, we come back here and we see, all right, car at. So I want to call this on a string. What do I do, right? What, do I just write car at? No, that's not right. What you need to do is say, we have our string A here. We need to do A dot car. Oh, well, look at that. That's our first one. Car at and int index. Now, we don't go ahead and just type out int index. It has to be an actual index. All right. And an index is a number, again, 2. Or, yeah, 2. And we do need our semicolon here. Now, what is this going to do, right? Well, luckily we can go... Oh, I just realized you guys couldn't see that. Here it is. All right. So this is the line right here. A dot car at, and it's 2, not int index. All right. Now we can go back to the Oracle docs where we can take a closer look at what in the world is exactly happening. And we can see it says returns the character value at the specified index. And you're like, whoa, why are we using all these fancy terms, right? Well, Java tries to be professional in this way. They're not going to use slang terms to describe this kind of stuff, right? They're going to use big words. In this case, essentially what this means, it just means returning the letter at whatever index you put in. All right, that's what it means. Ignore all the fancy terms. It's important you understand how to read this type of text, though, because every single one of these docs is going to be written this way. Every single response you're going to see online is going to be written that way, because it's a certain format, or rather formality, that Java programmers tend to go through. I mean, really any programmer, but you tend to try and keep your language as precise as possible, and oftentimes that makes it seem like the text is convoluted when, obviously you think you could make it a lot simpler and easier to understand. Now that we've established that, we can go ahead and come here. So returns the character value at the specific index. Essentially, that just means returning the letter at whatever index you put in. In this case, when we go back to our NetBeans IDE, and let's switch back over. All right. What this does is essentially 0, 1, 2. So S is 0, T is 1, R is 2. So if we are to run this, theoretically, it should say 2 somewhere. However, that's wrong. And if I were to just go ahead and run this file, you will see that it doesn't actually print out anything, right? Just our hello world from all the way up here. And the reason for that is because it's returning a value. And you're like, wait, what? Now we have printing and returning? What in the world does this mean, right? Well, this is where Java gets a little bit complicated. And I'm not really going to explain to you the higher level method stuff. For now, I'm going to try and put it into as layman's terms as I can. Printing a value makes it so you can see it on the console. And your console is this thing here. Everything that you see here is called your console. Returning a value simply, quite literally, just returns a value. It does not print anything out for you. It just gives the value to wherever you're storing it. And in this case, we're not storing it anywhere. And that's an issue, right? We should be storing it somewhere. However, we can skip this step by being lazy and just printing this value out directly. And you'll see that, oops, let's not put our thing there. All right, and you will see that it will work just like this. And now if we were to run this file, you will see that it will print out hello world and R. So now you're like, all right, that's pretty cool and all, but you still haven't explained to me the other column, right? This first column seems pretty all-encompassing, but not quite. The reason for that is because this is saying modifier and type. For now, we're going to completely ignore modifier. And the reason why I say that is because, honestly, it's a very high-level thing, and it will take a lot of programming before you have to understand that at all. Instead, we're going to talk about our type. This type is nothing special. It's what we've been talking about all along. It is going to be, you know, character, integer, string, boolean. You have more fancy ones like bytes. You know, you don't really need to understand exactly what byte is. You have void, right? And void is actually a very special type. It means nothing, okay? Literally nothing. I don't mean like, never mind. It means that you're not getting anything. Now, at this point, we're like, all right, why does it matter that it returns a character type? Well, in our case, in our program, all we are doing is going ahead and printing it out directly. So for us, this typing doesn't matter. However, if we are to go ahead and delete this printout function, our printing part of this, and instead we are to type out car z is equal to blah blah blah, now it matters because we can't store it as int z. It will give us an error. And if we were to go ahead and run this, it should give us an error. Well, it doesn't. That's very unfortunate. Maybe we have to print it. Alright, now let's try and print out int z. Okay. Well, it just did something very special. It did 114, and essentially that's the numerical value of r. I believe in some sort of database. I forget. But that's not what we're aiming for. We don't want 114, right? When in the world is 114? We want car, right? And as simple as changing the typing is, we will see that goes back to printing out r. So I've just gone through a lot in a little bit of time, so I'll give you guys about a minute to soak that all in before we move on to our next thing. Make sure you really understand exactly what everything is going on here, alright? Because this is the very basics before we start jumping into the more complicated stuff. Alright, so now we're going to do something where we kind of move backwards almost. But not backwards in a sense where we're learning simpler stuff. Backwards in that, I guess it is simpler stuff, but not really because it's still technically moving forward. And what I mean by this is we're going to talk about Boolean. Boolean is in contrast to, I guess, our decimal system. Not quite, because it's binary to decimal, not Boolean to decimal. But Boolean can only be represented in values of true and false. And if I am to go ahead and type this out, Boolean value is equal to true. I think it's lowercase. Yeah, you'll see that this Boolean value is highlighted in bright blue. I'm not. It might be Boolean. Yeah, it's Boolean. So you'll notice that it's highlighted in bright blue because this is not just any random text that I typed out. This is true. And what this serves as is almost like a it's a more direct, I don't know, I guess approach of just going ahead and, you know, storing a variable and saying true or false, right? Obviously you can compare strings and that kind of stuff, but Boolean proves to be a obviously simpler way of achieving this. There is nothing really that special about Boolean, other than the fact that it will lead us into the topic of if statements. Boolean in itself is not complicated at all. It can only have two values, 0 and 1, true or false, right? Now, I may have just confused you right there. You're like, wait, what? 0 and 1, true and false? Those have nothing to do with each other, right? Well, 0 and 1 are going to be your binary representation of Boolean. It's not something you're ever going to type out in your Boolean value. You're never going to type out 0. As a matter of fact, I think you can actually store the value as 0, but there's just no point. Just type out true or false, right? The reason why I say 0 and 1 is because the way a computer works is, you may know already, it's a binary-based system. Meaning that everything that your computer does is just doing a bunch of 0, 1 calculations, right? Except, obviously, it's not doing 0, 1, 0 plus 1, right? It's doing 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, blah, 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 plus blah, 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 right? A lot of calculations, not simple, right? Well, Boolean is simply, I guess, a way for us to better imagine it, such that, I don't know, we can use the basis of Boolean as well, right? Because in the end, it is pretty helpful. You know, it's like yes or no, but there is no maybe. Instead, I mean, I get okay. Clarifying this again, there is technically a maybe, and that is storing it as a null value, right, or void, however you want to call it. And the null value essentially means there is no value, right? And no value means maybe, right? Unless you create a separate statement for that, which is a different story, right? That brings us into topic of if statements. Now, we only have a couple minutes left, and next class we're going to be focused much more onto if statements, but for now I'm going to give you a quick brief on exactly what an if statement is. An if statement is something like you would write in English in your essay. Not really in an essay, but, you know, just in a sentence, right? If I see a cupcake, I would like to eat it. Or else I will just be hungry and sad I did not get a cupcake, right? That is the basic way a human mind thinks. You go around your house, you say you want to get to your desk. You open your front door and you say, I want to get to my desk. If there is a door in my way, I will open up the door. If I'm going down this certain hallway, I will take a right. If I see my seat, I'm going to go ahead, pull it out, and sit down. You may not really take these slow steps, but secretly that is kind of what's going on inside your consciousness, right? Your brain always has these checks, and it's always going to be stored in the format of an if and else statement. Obviously, you can understand a little bit of where I'm going with this. Your if statement has to be where if a condition is met, then something can be performed. If a condition is not met, then this certain something action cannot be performed, and I will either perform another action or I will do nothing at all, right? It's like I'm driving down a road. If I see a goose on the road, I will stop. If there is no goose on the road, I'm just going to keep on going. To put this into more programming technical terms, if goose on the road is spotted equals true, stop. Else, nothing, right? There's just no code there, right? That is the entire logic behind it. I know it's going to be hard to get right now, but that is something that we're going to be focusing on next class, right? So if statements is going to be your logical implementer in programming. Anytime you want a decision to be made, if statement is the way to go. Only if statement for now, right? So now time's up. So I thank you all for watching this. And if you have any questions, feel free to email at capitalroboticsclub at gmail.com. And next class, we will be going more into the depth of our if statements and I guess continue our Java Foundations lesson. Hopefully this lesson was slow enough. If I still need to give more examples, if you want me to explain certain things more, if you want me to move even faster, right? If you think I'm moving too slow, then feel free to raise up these concerns. If not, I thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Thank you.